Madai, lodging on the Ba River in autumn. Wind and rain linger on the plains of Ba. At evening, rows of geese fly over. Leaves fall from the trees in this strange place. By an old lamp, this man alone in the night. White dew settles in an empty garden. Across the wall, country monks, my neighbors. Here, too long, outside my gate, a wasteland. What year, I wonder, will I serve my prince again? So, moving on, this is the first of two poems, one after the other, by Ma Dai, present in this anthology. So, let's introduce Ma Dai. Not a very important figure, really. He's a mid to late Tang poet. So mainly his greatest period of production would probably be the 850s, 860s, the middle years of the 9th century. Not a very distinguished career. He passed the Jinshi examinations in 844. He served for a time under the Jedushi of, that is the military commissioner of the north in the region of Hedong, and afterwards was demoted and ended up in a minor post at the National University. So a person that occupied minor, middle to low ranking posts in the bureaucracy, but for the most part, the typical scholar official with the typical level of attainment of positions in government. Okay, so going from the poet to the poem. So this is a poem about well, it's I would basically say it's a landscape poem. I would say that's the main topic of the poem. It's describing an area which appears in the title. The title says Ba River, then the first line says the plains of Ba, Ba Shang. I'm not sure there is a river in this area. So, because the area is so important for the poem, it's not really described in a lot of detail, but being there is a very important topic for the poem. Let's talk a little bit about Bashang. So Bashang is an area in the north of China, in what is today called Inner Mongolia, close to the frontier with Mongolia and China. So this is part of the Eurasian steppe. It's a grassland. It's part of the old frontier that separated the Chinese empire and its civilization from the Turkic barbarian areas of the north. It's, as I say, a steppe. It's pretty flat land with hardly any mountains, very difficult to the Chinese landscape. Very extreme changes in temperature during day and night and through the year. Grassy, not too many trees. And it would have been felt, as it's clearly perceived in this poem by a Chinese scholar official living there, as a barbarian land, not the Chinese heartland, not the place of agriculture, of millet and wheat and rice, not a place of big cities, of mountains and rivers. No, this would be a foreign and alien landscape. Now, we've encountered poems, especially poems about military campaigns in Central Asia, some by Wan Changling and Sun Shen come to mind, that also describe the alienness of this landscape for the classical Chinese. This is the area, the region they love to loathe. It's not China. And it's not only China from a cultural perspective, it's not China from a geographical and even climatic point of view. It doesn't have the same seasons, it doesn't have the same sort of landscape. So it's a space of alienation. It's a space of unhappiness for the poet. It's a sort of exile, whether real or symbolic, but it's a place of exile for the poet. So this is a poem about the poet in that region and in autumn, as we've mentioned frequently. Autumn, the background of an autumn setting adds pathos, adds melancholy feeling to the background of a poem. So we might imagine any scholar official would be sad being in Bashang. He would be even sadder if it were autumn, because it's the most melancholy season of the year. And I imagine it's quite cold in this area of the Eurasian steppe, where the Siberian winds come. So that's the main theme, actually, you could say. A description slash lamentation at being in an alien landscape. in a decidedly non-Chinese, peripheral, marginal place. There are other elements too, you could call them subtopics. One of them is the wakefulness at night trope, which appears in a lot of classical Chinese poems. That is, the poetic persona is unable to sleep, and he describes his long night being awake, trying to distract himself with sounds and sights. And the reason for not being able to sleep can be love, sickness, or sadness at being far from friends, or any other reason. Like in this case, being in a semi-barbarous frontier region. And at least in this version of the poem, in this translation, there's also the desire to serve the emperor present as a sub-theme. And but this is intertwined with the idea of going back to the center, to Chang'an, to the capital, to a civilized place instead of to this barbarian land, this god-forsaken territory in the north, which is more fit for horses than for men. Okay, then as usual, let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet. Wind and rain linger on the plains of Ba. At evening, rows of geese fly over. So the first picture we have of the landscape is of a wet and cold landscape. The wind and the rain linger here. Perhaps they would be briefer in China proper, I don't know, but here the wetness and the coldness, the cutting coldness of the wind seem to last longer. At the same time, we get evening, so the sun is setting, it's a sad part of the day, remember? And we get rows of geese flying over, which automatically connects us with autumn. That is, geese are migrating birds. They're used a lot of the time in Chinese poems as a symbol for autumn and as one of the natural elements that evokes the season of autumn. And they also denote the scholar official as a person who is traveling, who is far away from home. Second couplet. Leaves fall from the trees in this strange place. By an old lamp, this man alone in the night. So we get a little bit of a zoom in from that general landscape of plains and the geese in the sky. Now we center into a strange place with trees and leaves fall, another indication that it's autumn. Leaf falls in this strange place. So another translation that I read moves the adjective strange from the trees, from the place to the trees themselves. I imagine there wouldn't be many trees in this region because it's a steppe, it's a treeless region for the most part. And the ones that might be there might indeed be different from the classical Chinese trees. But anyway, we get this view of autumn, of trees falling, tree leaves falling in an alien landscape, or it could be an alien tree. And we get the scholar official. We've moved from evening to night. He is awake with a little lamp emitting some light. So he is lonely. He is in the dark, surrounded by the dark. So again, night is even more melancholy and sad a part of day than evening itself. In the darkness. Next couplet. White dew settles in an empty garden. Across the wall, country monks, my neighbors. So the second couplet located us in the immediate surroundings of the poetic persona. In the third couplet, we see what he sees and we experience what he experiences. And there are two images that come to mind. The first is dew. We have an empty garden. We might imagine this area in general, the whole Bajang area, is not too densely populated. This might be or might not be being evoked by the emptiness of the garden, or the empty garden is just, it reflects its night and it emphasizes the loneliness of the poetic persona. So, empty garden, dew is settling. Dew, another referent for autumn. We've seen the geese, we've seen the leaves falling. Dew is the last of the main significance, of the main symbols employed to evoke autumn. Dew that turns into frost in colder climates. So we might imagine this visual view of whiteness, not the whiteness of snow that we did encounter in another poem about barbarian areas, but the whiteness of dew completely covering the stiff grass in the garden. And then we get another image that takes us a little bit beyond the garden. Across the wall, probably the garden wall, country monks, my neighbors. So there's probably a monastery nearby. We might imagine that Madai is not in a city. He might be in some sort of a small town or hamlet, and there isn't an urban landscape here. The neighbors of the scholar official are a monastery, a rural monastery, we might imagine. Again, in another translation I saw of this poem, the translation says like a ruined monastery, so not an inhabited one. But I imagine that's open to interpretation. But anyway, it's still a desolate place, yeah, with a white dew-covered empty garden and no normal neighbors, just a monastery nearby, whether inhabited or not. Finally, the last couplet, which summarizes, as usual, the thoughts that the whole poem is meant to build up to. Here, too long, outside my gate, a wasteland. What year, I wonder, will I serve my prince again? So Madai makes it pretty explicit that he is in a wasteland. It's a physical wasteland like the steppe, but it's also, I imagine, a psychological and mental wasteland for the poet who feels he should be somewhere else and that his abilities would be better used by being employed in a more civilized area, closer to Chinese civilization and to its center of power, which is evidently the court and the emperor in the court. What year, I wonder, will I serve my prince again? That seems to be what the last line is pointing at. When will I go back to the heartland and serve the emperor in a more central position? So altogether, a pretty conventional poem, descriptive, landscapish, seasonal in autumn, but with this emphasis that appears in a lot of frontier poetry on the unsettling, alien nature and exoticism, not in a good way, of the frontier regions of the north of China.